So we're together. It's so good to see you. And it's great to practice together. And I thought tonight we could explore lucidity and the one-eyed monster. Lucidity is the key to our practice. And the one-eyed monster is both an alliteration to the television, as well as the computer, as well as ekajati. So protector principle, media consumption, and our Dharma practice. And I don't know, I was thinking about it earlier today, and then of course we'll just have a discussion together and see where it goes. But I was thinking about it, how if you had told somebody, I guess I'm thinking of someone like my dad or mom who grew up at a time where there weren't television yet, and it just was coming on. And there's radio programs, and then, and you think of radio programs, it's like now we have that with podcasts and things like that. And, you can listen to things, but there's something about the, well, I don't know. I guess if you're consuming, hardcore political media, a radio broadcast can be incredibly triggering and intense. But generally, sounds leave other senses free a little bit. We might have strong reactions, but we're getting all this other stimulus, right? When we look at a visual stimulus, it tends to be the most prominent sense. And also, sound often comes along with it, so it's the double whammy. And I think about, our practice, we've talked a lot about it, that it's about lucidity, which is not eclipsing into our own projections, but remaining in the light of awareness, knowing what's happening while it's happening to some degree, being able to see the arising of emotions, thoughts, opinions. At least some of the time we go, wait, I'm having these experiences, as opposed to this just totally blended, right? And when we think about the teachings on Shenpa, this kind of grasping or seizing of the mind, the most intense Shenpa is that we don't even know we're hooked. We live in a realm, almost a hell realm of fixation, where, whether we're, protesting in the Capitol or on our social media, and we're so angry and so in our ideologies that we don't question anything about what we think. And it's really kind of a lower realm in terms of the level of lucidity happening. That's just kind of, that's not an ideological opinion. That's a fact, right? That's just, one is absorbed. Whether the ideology one is agreeable or disagreeable, one can be completely lost in one's emotions and thoughts. Coming down from that, one is just so hooked and so drawn that we're dragged around, but we have some awareness of being dragged behind the car of our passion. It sucks and it hurts, but we're like, I'm not letting go. So that's different though, right? It's different than that even kind of hell realmish state or hungry ghost state where there's not even an option to let go. You don't even know you're hooked, so how could you let go, right? It's like so complete is the grasping. And then we come down from the grasping where we're kind of being dragged along to just the strong emotional grasping of wanting something. Maybe we're even able to let go of it, but we see it, we feel ourselves getting hooked, as Pema would say, and we feel ourselves seizing. And, we intervene at the level we can. And then finally, the lightest level of Shenpa, which we were talking about this weekend a little bit, is just the labeling an object, just apprehending an object and calling it something, or freezing a perception and saying, it's almost like you already saw it, but then to just the psych grasping of having some sense of holding that thing that you've already known. Not trusting, right? Not trusting the egoless nature of shining clear light and having to have some little like, I know that, or that's that. It's like, I joke it's kind of the narrator, like, that's a bird. Now you're walking out the house. It's like, I can tell, yes, now you're telling me you can tell. So, it's kind of ridiculous, but that light level, but those are said to be these 4 levels of Shinpa. And as you can see with each level, probably our body mind is slightly less agitated and more relaxed as we get down to a very ordinary state. An extraordinary kind of relaxation that comes about is when we're so relaxed, whether it's being in nature, in a hot tub, getting a massage, whatever extra circumstance where you're just like, and you can kind of feel yourself give up you're like, I don't know, as a label, I don't know. You're like, I don't know, who cares? Like you're relaxed enough where you're not concerned about micromanaging the world. And I joke that subtle narration Shempa is really something significant, though, because it is this continual slight distrust of our world and it's that subtle level of control. I want to be in control, just even if I'm saying bird, car, and to give that up is actually quite profound. But we have to know how. And the way we know how is through lucidity, knowing when the mind is eclipsing or shenpa-ing. Because it turns out what I talk about as the eclipse is the kind of resultant subjective experience or environmental shift of Shenpa is that the awareness as Shenpa increases, lucidity dims. But what's so crazy is lucidity or clear light nature of mind is the very source of the dynamic power that allows us to eclipse in the first place, which is wild. But unhinged, this energy can turn on itself and vortex in to its own opaqueness and create a sense of density and separation and duality and suffering and samsara. But ultimately, all of that is really the creation of our mind, our free nature tied in knots. So the path is unknotting our inner channels, our mind, our body, our whole system. And lucidity is the natural state of being unknotted, it's not knowing something per se, but just knowing shining or awareness itself. And yes, we can know things or not know things, but we know we're in that shining quality of spaciousness. Now, ultimately, you could say that's the greatest protection. That a dun, an obstacle, is our mind getting lost and getting scattered into our own projections and chase. And when we are not mindful, we're not aware, we get into all sorts of patterns, and then we have an attack of the duns. We're overtaken by this kind of eclipsing or storyline. And sometimes we feel used by that. When we feel bad, we feel like, oh man, especially if we have the privilege and fortune of being practitioners where we know about being lucid and then we lose it and we come back and go, oh man, it's like we feel extra bad because there was an alternative theoretically. And so, but what's so beautiful in Tibetan cultures, they didn't drive that shame into the individual because they felt individuals weren't so solid. So they said someone had an attack of the duns. I didn't even say that person's an asshole. I just said that person was temporarily insane, as we would say. And sometimes we have that defense in legal case. Oh, that person was under temporary insanity. Well, now we're having a more sophisticated understanding of trauma and mental illness and all that. But that was, for a while, that was a pretty standard. I'm sure it still happens. But the idea, I think according to Buddhism, all insanity is temporary. It just could last your whole life. So it doesn't mean it's the end. It's still temporary and it's true. Its nature isn't permanent, but oh, how painful. But how does this all play into what the topic that I was saying? Well, I remember that, I don't know who wrote that, some poet or somebody called the TV a one-eyed monster or something. But I was thinking of my parents going back to the beginning and how they grew up without that. And then can you imagine people from their generation now seeing, people immersed in these devices all day on transit and in the world, and there's one-eyed monsters everywhere. At one time we would talk about television, and then we started talking about cable. And now we talk about Netflix and YouTube. And yet it's all still, and Zoom. And I mean, we know during the pandemic that Netflix and Zoom's stock have gone way up because everyone's using it. But everyone always was. But now it's more than ever. And it's an interesting thing to, relating. When it was called the one-eyed monster, I think there was this fear that people would be, lost in these fantasy worlds on their screen, and therefore maybe it would be antisocial, or it would not promote pro-social value, or maybe it's kind of like living a false life, or not really living your life, living vicariously, but one could, so a fear of tremendous escapism. Of course, I've always wondered if anyone can ever crack the technology on the holodeck. In Star Trek, they have that room you go in and literally you can be anywhere. I mean, man, if they figure that out, all bets are off. Of course, it'd be an incredible teaching environment, incredible meditation practice place. So, you can't, nothing can be stopped as long as there are people that want to wake up their ways. But I mean, that, talk about a technology that make the one-eyed monster look pathetic. By the way, I've tried virtual reality and it gives me a stomach ache. So that doesn't work. It's pretty neat. You really can look around. It's exciting. You feel like you're in it much more than TV. But if you move around too much, your body's like, this is not real. I am about to throw up. And I'm like, but I'm just playing. And it's like, I don't like this. So I've tried. I was flying in Google Maps all over California, and my body was like, you are going to make me puke. And I was like, made me wonder if I was really just flying about, would I want to puke as well? I don't know. I don't think so, but I haven't had that experience, so I don't know. But in my dreams, I don't want to puke when I fly, so there you go. Something's weird about VR. But if you could actually be in a totally immersive thing, that would be a fascinating conundrum for human evolution. And we're heading there potentially. But even right now, with these seem to do just fine to give us a lot of focus and entertainment and education. And here even we're practicing together in Sangha and Dharma. So again, it is not good or bad, it's how one uses it. That's always going to be true. But I talked about Ekajati too, and she's kind of a one-eyed monster. She has a single eye, and she's terrifying, and she's holding a beating fresh heart in one hand, bleed. Probably ripped it out. We don't talk about that, but I don't know how you get that in your hand. It's probably like red hand. Talk about red-handed. And then in the other hand, she's emanating a thousand iron wolves. And I'm sure they're not like gonna lick your paw and go, could I have a candy? They're out to get you. So she is terrifying. Why is she terrifying? Because the protector principle is that we're trying to use the things that are difficult in our life to wake us up, to increase our lucidity. So I've even put a little addendum for myself on Ekajati chant when I do offer my tea at night, and I say, whatever happens, whether it's good or bad, may I remember that it's you trying to wake me up. And that's been an evolution for me, because I have been somewhat more hopeful that the protectors might be, hey, we know each other. I know some people, we're kind of in, can and they're like, nope. You're like, okay, all right, that's fine. Like, no, get in line with everyone. All right, yeah, okay. Yeah, so there's no favoritism with the protectors. And furthermore, that would be kind of, although some of the chants are rife with this conflict in human nature, because even in those chants they're like, may good things happen, and may, you know, but with Ekajati, you don't find that stuff in her chants. And there's just no fooling. And so she has this single eye of Dharmakaya, this all-seeing lucidity of wisdom. And her single fang, which pierces the heart of Mara or obstacles, and her single breast, which nurtures supreme practitioners, those who can hang with her ferociousness. And so as I've been sort of looking at theism or favoritism in protector practice as it existed in Tibet and in myself and in many people, and I think, wow, it's really hard to like truly put out a little cup of tea and say, okay, whatever happens, I'm going to try and use that to wake up. Okay, that's a big deal for me, though. I know you don't seem to care, but so, you know, she doesn't care. She just is. And so we're left with ourselves. Now, you put these three together, lucidity in practice and Shenpa, the screen culture, and then protection. And what I'm bringing them all together is, what do we do while we work with screens? And, you know, because it is such a part of our culture, and because it's curious. And I want to say, like, it is also for myself, I just relax sometimes and watch a show at night, you know, and it's a nice way to just relax and be simple and just watch a story. So I'm all for that. And I do that personally, and I don't see any problem with that. However, I have practiced with or played with watching something and remaining in this space of lucidity around what's going on the screen. I remember Khenpo Rinpoche gave these instructions to us that we should go watch a scary movie or a dramatic movie or show and recognize for the duration of the show that it's just appearance emptiness. It's just appearances of light on a screen. And I can't tell you how fun that and weird and challenging that can be, because, you know, you think, oh, it's easy, no problem. And then you're like, oh my God. And before you know it, you're like, what happens next? You know, and it's like, it's really this, what is the, and again, I want to be so clear. I'm probably after this going to go watch a show. Like, so I don't know. I have no problem with watching shows. I like watching shows. And I really also feel like we can develop tremendous momentum in our practice, and we don't have to try so hard all the time, but maybe just once in a while, it's nice to challenge the one-eyed monster to a duel. And, you know, in this sense, the protection of Ekajati is, can I remember that the screen is sort of Ekajati? It is this one eye of showing me the display nature of samsara and nirvana. And can I look at it and go, wait, it is Ekajati's display. It is the display of lucidity. Now, so I was trying this recently with a show, and I felt it was a really good example because it was like a mid-level quality drama. Like, not so good that it's really sneaky, and not so bad that you're like, it's so easy to do that you're just like, I'm bored, and there's like, this is stupid. So you have to find, I don't know, you can also just go right to the jugular and find a show you love and try to do it there. But I wouldn't recommend that, honestly. I wouldn't. Why not save that for when you want to watch a show? Here, I'm just saying, pick something that's somewhat interesting but has drama in it. And as you're watching, remaining embodied, remaining aware of your embodied presence, noticing when you start to maybe like start to get sucked into something, and then come back to the totality of your awareness and senses. Now, what's interesting is what I find is at that point, you could feel a little bit like you're dissociated or just so pulled back that you're kind of like, and that's not what we're trying to cultivate. But that might be okay for that to come about at first. It's okay if you have that experience. But then coming in a little bit, and can we practice the real lucidity of feeling what's happening on the screen and remaining not totally sucked in, but also in our totality of awareness? And that's the sweet spot. And it's great because you'll notice when you're too pulled back, you're like, there may be a screen and a show on. It's like there are lights. I'm like, yeah, it's too empty. Too empty. You're preferring emptiness. But if you're too in the appearances, it's like, oh my God, what's that? Oh, I've totally forgot. It's just a show. So anyway, I think this is that notion of protection being lucidity, and that protection is also from going dissociating or getting sucked in. It's that middle way of, can I watch a show or engage with screen time in a way where at times, for maybe a time you decide, maybe it's just a section of a show or maybe it's a whole show, but you don't have to do it all the time, right? That's not the point. It's just to challenge yourself and see, and maybe you've already done this. I was doing it recently and thinking, this is so fascinating. Like, and some shows, like, they, when they have like bad behavior and violent things or scary things, it's good because it does stir up our emotions and our you can really see those, how easy or natural it is to identify even with like not the best acting. We're such a generous audience. We're like, no, but that would really suck, like we give the benefit of the doubt. And and here it's so interesting to say, can I feel what's going on and be open to it and let myself feel it without losing the lucidity and yeah, just dancing with that. And I do think that is a fun little practice. And at the same time, it's kind of profound because obviously that's a similar thing to lucid dreaming. In our lucid dreaming, it's our own mind and our own production company. And when that happens and we kind of start to go into that, is that eclipse into the story, into the content. And when we are lucid, and if we're too out of it, we just wake up, right? There's a quality, if we're not engaged in the display nature, we're just sort of like, or, well, and that's not necessarily bad. There are other things that can happen too. They're fine. But there's a quality that lucidity isn't afraid of feeling things, right? So anyway, it's just an interesting, that was that's what I've got for us tonight. And I thought at this point we could just discuss, and obviously anything that comes up around this theme and beyond doesn't have to stay on topic entirely. Yeah, Steve.
So, Nick, what you're pointing to practice this. I'm just pretty obvious, I'm sure, but is that in our day-to-day life, I get sucked into storylines during the day all the time. So, is this sort of like practicing riding a bicycle intentionally, and then when you're in real life, being able to pull back from being so sucked into things that happen during the day, maintaining that type of lucidity that you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's subtler when we have the conflicting need of relating to our relative existence and then profound practice and vision. We don't want to create that tension. I mean, certainly what we tend to do is maybe we relax and practice and then go back to a task. It's wonderful to mix the two together. And that definitely is where this is headed, like you're saying. But I think it's kind of fun to pick something like, yeah, that's clearly entertainment. There's no real, nothing at stake, right? If we get it wrong, and it's not like we're adding to the real things that we have to do, and because like I think starting with something simple like this is the idea, but absolutely. Yeah, that's the intent. Starting with something made up, something clearly entertainment, but then exactly how does that skill and learning how to kind of feel but not be sucked in during the day, and of course with our screens or with people or our jobs or anything, social media, you know, oh gosh, it's such a helpful skill. Any kind of media. Um, Yeah, and so of course you could also try it during the day with anything you want. You don't have to listen to me. But I just thought it'd be fun to start with something that's clearly entertainment, so you're getting a sense of what is this like? What does that feel like? And then bringing it into the day, you know, having a template.
Nick, um, you know, you've been introducing me to this sacred world um, through the blessings, visualizing blessings. So, are you also saying that maybe the lucidity is realizing that we're in the sacred world all the time? So, I mean, I often, forget about it after, if I'm doing the practice during meditation, and then when I go on with my daily life, I kind of forget, oh yeah, I am in the sacred world, but I come back to it occasionally during the day. And could that represent lucidity? Because that's really, in a sense, that's the truth. We are always surrounded by blessings, even if it's appearing like something bad's happening to me or I get angry or whatever. If I
Yeah,
touch back into that sacred world realm, then things usually open up.
absolutely. Yeah, and you know, it's this is just sort of a side practice to what we're already doing, right? This is not exactly like you said. This is nothing new in some sense, but it's just a fun way to kind of support ourselves in exploring, especially how do we get drawn into story. Because I find like when there's not a lot of story and we're just working with kind of a lower level of energy, that practice has in tremendous richness during the day of recognizing lucidity and sacredness and being in touch with our feelings and all of that. And you know, that's wonderful. Um, what technically this falls under the category of what are called enhancement practices. And you know, you have your standard practices that are just what we do. And enhancement practices were practices such as chud, which was the, you know, going into the charnel grounds with a thigh bone trumpet and blowing this horn to call all the ghosts to come eat your body, you know, and you'd offer up parts of your body to them and imagine you're chopping your light, empty body, but you know, you have to you don't actually cut yourself. But and the spirits you feed them with, and you feed them on what normally people be attached to, and in doing so, you know, you also conquer or work with fear very directly. And Khenpo Rinpoche did a lot of this practice when he left Tibet. He went around to charnel ground in India and Nepal, and just lived in them. He had no home, and he would do these kinds of practice. He said it's really good to get afraid, and then you look at who's afraid, and you realize there's no one solid there, right? In our nature, even in the most scary situations, we are never trespassing or leaving the scope of luminous emptiness space. Like that's our indestructible nature. It's the nature of all appearance. So even though bad things happen, they never really change the fundamental nature. Now that's hard. That's hard to experience sometimes, right? Because we get scared of bad things and we want good things to happen. So an enhancement practice is another example of enhancement practices would be in the 6 yogas of Nairopa or 6 yogas of Naiguma. These practices were meant for more advanced meditators, but one of them would be illusory body practice, which is that during the day, we imagine the world to be a dream during the day. You know, we look at the dreamlike quality of perception, and we, in some of those enhancement practices, the instructions were to go into the village from your retreat and steal something, but get caught on purpose. And then when they're yelling at you, you look at your mind and you stay in lucidity, and you apologize and you give it back, and they, you know, if they hit you, you don't get mad, and you just kind of like, it was really like, I mean, it's wild, right? And of course there are debates that enhancement practice was what some people, scholars, believe that what Trungpa called crazy wisdom was a kind of form of enhancement practice gone either wrong or gone more permanent. However, if you want to say positive, I don't know, but like it depends on the culture of the practitioner and which school they were in. But people have debates. But basically, the enhancement practice, when it became sort of normalized, is crazy wisdom. And you can kind of see that with Trungpa's life. I mean, you can't deny that he was always doing these things where he didn't look great, you know, and he wasn't coming out trying to look great. He was trying to wake up himself and his students, and that was his ethics. Of course, people wonder about people with more non-dual perspectives. Can they be ethical in a relative dualistic society? It depends who, right? It's always back to this question: who decides? Who decides? You know, does Google decide which product you're buying because they track your behavior and sell it to some company? Yeah, a little bit. But you're the one who decides if you buy it or not. But do you decide? Well, if you're really hooked on something, you're not really deciding, right? So it's this crazy thing. And I think as long as there's lucidity, there's an argument for some kind of really deep ethics going on. But impact matters, right? The way we affect people matters. And so what I'm proposing is, rather than going too far into the emptiness, being like, who cares? And then you impact people in all sorts of crazy ways that may or may not be helpful to them. Also, we're not going in and saying, I'm fighting with things and trying to make it a certain way. We're that middle way of being able to kind of enhance a little, but stay in touch with the relative reality and the ultimate reality. Now, maybe you could argue that that was, some schools always wanted to do that, or some teachers or some lineages were always saying, oh yeah. The whole thing about enhancement practices was not to become imbalanced, though. Let's not be mistaken, right? Of course, they were just methods to see something and test something. Another form of enhancement practice that's more in the Nyingma tradition was called Korde Rushon, which is separating samsara from nirvana. And in these practices, you would imagine you were in the different realms and the hell realms, and you'd be screaming and hitting things, and you know. But during all of it, you do that, and then you try to recognize your lucid awareness in the middle of it while doing it, and then when you stopped, and then you'd be in the hungry ghost realm, you know. Can you imagine? Trying all these different things, going through strong emotions on purpose, but trying to recognize the whole time. So why is that called Korde Rushon, separating samsara from nirvana? Kor being circle or samsara, de being bliss or nirvana. Korde Rushon, separating. The idea was you want to separate the behaviors that, or no, the view that leads to confusion from wisdom. So you want to separate ordinary dualistic mind from wisdom mind and know why they're different. That's the separation. It's really a weird term because we wouldn't say separation, we would say distinguish, but it's a translation issue, but same point. And distinguishing what really makes things samsaric and what really makes them nirvanic. And then we get into this whole theme of the inseparability of samsara and nirvana. And you can see how that's all in here, right? This idea that it's not what's happening, is how we work with it. And back to what you were saying, Stephen, about blessings, and you know, it's always there.
I can't relate most immediately in terms of the the 3D. Not that I don't like Netflix, but I spend a lot more time on podcasts and Zoom and phone calls. But I do relate in terms of, although if it's something about a scary movie, I won't watch it because I get totally sucked in with it. And I'm like, I don't want to see it. So maybe someday I'll take on that, but not anytime soon. But I caught myself this afternoon. I was making several phone calls about my sister, and all you guys know about my sister here, for those who watch later. So, and I just suddenly was so angry and scared and so caught in, so triggered after I'd gotten off of a phone call with someone who's in charge of her group home and their plans. And I realized I was really protectively working from a really helpless part of me that almost felt like I even told myself the story of like, this is like David, trying to knock down Goliath or something. And I was able to be lucid enough just to recognize that and go about and make my dinner and just breathe a little bit. But boy, I was, and I could tell I was hooked by that helpless part, and with flares between being angry and so, just with that, I understand what you're talking about.
I mean, that's so much more fruitional than watching a scary movie in some ways, even though you hesitate. I get it. But that's actually something that we know there's real consequences for people we really care about. And it is, so it's amazing that you're bringing your practice into that. And isn't that interesting? Because there's nothing wrong with the story, right? Stories are part of our identities and our way of functioning. Even they're healthy to have story to a degree. It's when we get lost in it that it is just a crapshoot. We just don't know where it'll lead, and it often can lead into the spiral of identification with, struggle with it rather than knowing it's happening. And when we know it's happening, and especially with something with such personal stakes, that's exactly where this kind of balance becomes so powerful. Is, and I think of it also in relationships, like when I'm frustrated in a relationship and I have an emotion coming, when I can feel it happening and know it's happening and I'm lucid in it, there's like this different quality. It's like, okay, careful what I say. I could say something right now that would not be good for anyone. And then you can feel when you're trying to, like, I want to say that. Okay, no. Okay, I want to. I know. It's like a little kid where you're like, no, don't. Like the dog going for the food on the counter. No. So that's obviously the real heart of what we're doing, is bringing it in the way you are there, Lynn. That's really powerful.
I'm just thinking about how, being on retreat or being in some kind of capacity of serving, there's nothing quite like those situations to make everything like really bright and like almost painfully. um, and yet here I am signing up for one thing after another. But it just, I guess I don't really have a point other than to reflect on the magic of the container and the intention for being there, and how that kind of enhances the lucidity, or I don't know, there's lots of opportunities for me to see what my mind is doing. And I guess just feeling really fortunate over the past year. Again, a silver lining in the COVID cloud for me has been having lots of opportunities to practice. Not that I still haven't eclipsed on an almost daily basis. But yeah, it's just, it's powerful, and as painful as it can sometimes be, I'm also really grateful for it.
Yeah, I hear you, Janet. And I think all of us have that connection where we're, you know, we have this gathering, and then also the work we're going to be doing, working together more on things. And once I'm in a training or a program or a commitment or a retreat or a cohort like that, it does cast a pallor of luminosity or goodness on my practice life. You know, it's one thing to say, I mean, it's very profound when I can't remember if it's Kempo Rinpoche or Trungpa Rinpoche. I've heard it attributed to both of them, but I don't know. But the story of somebody said, oh, you like retreat so much, what are you doing here? And they said, the whole world is my retreat cave, you know. And I do think that is absolutely very real, that we can do that, you know. And what supports us in doing that, and I think, like, even just in the morning when we all sit together, you know, for me, knowing that we're going to sit together, I get out of bed, and I would not get out of bed at the same time unless I would get out at different times. And when I lived at the meditation center, it was so helpful. You know, it was such a container. And it's almost like, I don't think you can do the kinds of enhancement practices we're talking about where you intentionally are generating some level of challenge more than normal life on purpose, unless you feel resourced enough you know, that makes sense for me. You know, if someone's in a difficult period or moment, then it's not maybe the time. But in general, if we feel like we have a little extra slack, um, you know, the idea of an enhancement practice like is exactly this notion that if I can do it when the stakes are low and I know what I'm doing, I get interesting data for when it really matters. You know, and it might not help the way and when I want, but it will help in some way. It always does help. It's not always a one-to-one like linear, but it's definitely a valuable thing. Now, that said, I think in my earlier gung-ho practitioner career, I fell to the side of being too much like trying to, because I have a lot of passion I want to I really want to do this, and that's good and bad, right? You can't be a different person. You have to be who you are. But for me, that became very clear. If I pushed too much, it started to become its own problem rather than an enhancement practice. It was me trying to make something happen that's not how it works. I had to surrender at some point. You push and then you surrender. But when you're surrendered somewhat and you feel resourced, then a little push can be, it's all about balance.
Well, I like you're bringing up, enhancement practice in terms of media. So one of my versions would be more that, there's so many interesting podcasts or Zoom classes that I want to be part of, that I get to the point where, I'm doing dishes with them, I'm brushing my teeth to them, I'm trying to hear it while I'm in the shower. It's ridiculous. But I'm trying to keep up with, so it's the same thing, really. And thankfully, mostly, I'm listening podcasts with my earbuds, and so I'm protecting my ears. Thank goodness, most of the time I'm not outside listening to something, because I just really enjoy being in nature. But I notice that I don't allow enough spaciousness in between. Not that I think I'll go back to not listening while I'm doing the dishes. It really helps me get dishes done. But maybe even if with that, if I can just even stop and be aware of what I'm doing, even while I'm doing the dishes. Yes. And even maybe pause it intentionally even. And do some more dishes and then put it back on or something, play with it in that way.
I love that, Lynn. I think that's exactly right, to the customization or the personalization of enhancement practice, that it's just those moments where you go, this is fine. I don't have to, it's not like all or nothing. But what if I just do this time for a little bit? What happens? And it's that kind of open-ended, light-hearted mindset that makes it really work, meaning helpful, that we actually get to see something that might be illuminating. I keep thinking of this idea of mischievousness or sense of humor, that all humor really seems to originate from an ability to see the bigger perspective of a situation or dynamic. And then when you can kind of poke or point at one little thing and it opens something up. But if there's no humor, then everything is very there's an anxiety that builds, right? There's a tension and a lack of freedom, and it could even be that we're doing a lot to fill up a lot because of an anxiety that we're also not wanting to feel. And I find sometimes when I also, by the way, there's so much that I like to, when I drive, I'll put on things and I'll think, oh, what am I going to listen to? Is it music or audiobook or, and there are times where I drive where it's silent, but it's interesting when I just go to it, to pause and go, wait, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I doing this? Or in the middle of it, just pausing and noticing, how am I feeling? And if I'm feeling oh, actually, I'm kind of anxious, probably the quality for me anyway of my listening wasn't as good. I wasn't probably fully connected. And so it's just those kinds of, there's some humor or mischievousness, there you go, mischievousness, that's how people do it. That it's we're not trying to derail our entire program of what brings us comfort, because some of those activities are really helpful to our well-being and they're regulating of our nervous system. We don't want to that's why I'm saying even with the TV example, it wasn't always do this. That's too serious. But there's a quality of, there's almost like we have to, it has to almost catch us off guard, or we have to go, oh, I'm going to do that now. And then maybe you say, okay, I'm only going to do it for 5 minutes, or just for this show, or I'm only going to break from the podcast for 2 minutes, but some kind of interruption and playfulness with what we normally do. It definitely is. That's a very real kind of enhancement practice, I think. And in my experience, it really shows us something.
Well, just when you were talking about how do I feel, I think even that alone, like even when I was feeling helpless today, just for a moment, I was like, oh. But even if I did that, even watching the podcast, and because I know I'm anxious, even if my story is I'm anxious to get this, listen to this podcast or these dishes done by a certain time or something. I know it's more than that, but if I can even just take a moment to be kind and compassionate for myself and all of us beings, householders who are trying to get a lot of different things done.
Totally, Lynn. Totally. That's so beautiful. And yeah. And sometimes, depending, with the level of intensity that's going on in our life, it's hard to say that in a day one can stay fully with all the emotions that are coming up and process them in real time and just be right up to date and not taking on any water next. Like that's a full order sometimes. That's all we can do, is to just even, maybe not even keep up completely, but not get totally behind in or out of touch with ourselves. And other times things are lighter and easier, and that's not so, it doesn't maybe arise so much. But yeah, so interesting hearing you share, because it makes me think about just also how varied, and it kind of goes back to what Janet was sharing about context of container, and just how varied our situations are, and what is appropriate is actually the lucidity, right? That's knowing what you need is and enhancement practice is not, ultimately it's a research project, whereas the real general practice, the middle way, is this, what we're talking about, is knowing what we need. Whereas the research project, if you fit it in here and there, that's cool. It might yield some discovery.
Nick, I think you were talking about this thing. It seems like there's some similarity in getting lost in a story, or let's say the TV, and then let's say getting lost like in a tennis game or a soccer game. Like, you're actually intentionally, or I mean, there's some good in that type of focus or intensity, and getting kind of becoming one with that sport or whatever. I mean, maybe even with our practices, the ability to really believe in the visualizations or whatever.
Right. This is so interesting, because just like stories matter, right? Our stories matter. Our unique histories matter. The drama, the theater of life, the meaning of what has happened to us and how we've responded, the inspiring heroic stories of people, the positive sense of the meaning we make out of what has happened. And, when we think of spiritual bypassing and the idea of beginning to prefer the ultimate, and not really wanting to feel the relative, we drift away from, the kind of intensity. And the intensity isn't the problem. At our nature, the unity of appearance and emptiness is completely one. So it's not the preference of one or the other is irrelevant. But when we get lost in the appearances and forget the emptiness completely, we suffer tremendously from that claustrophobic state of mind. Yet, okay, so for my own self, like when I'm watching Barcelona play and I'm watching, Leo Messi, my favorite player, and he's doing some magical thing. I mean, I just get he's made me cry before. Like playing sport. I watch and I just cry because it's like it's just beyond. It's beyond what one would think is possible. It's so inspiring, it's so powerful, and it's so touching when they're doing poorly or when he's having a bad game. And I catch myself going, well, he is 33. This might be the end. And it's like, and I feel so sad, and I'm like, I don't want it to go down like this. I don't want, and then the next game he like does amazing stuff. And I'm like, I didn't say that. No, I didn't. I must have been drunk. There's no way I said it. No, it's like, but it's like the roller coaster of identification isn't even the problem here. What's so interesting is, can we ride the feelings? And, when they're losing and I'm like, should I watch the rest of the game or should I do something productive? And then I'm feeling sad. And then I feel some loyalty to them. Maybe I'm like, maybe they can pull it out, As long as I stay lucid, there's no wasted time. And so I think the stories actually, it would be a shame. It's what's so sad about the bypassing where we prefer the ultimate is we lose out on the brilliance of the fact that the profound connectiveness and feelingness. There's nothing that we it's like that waterfall you think is solid, but then you walk through it, and I think it's like it's actually, you can feel a lot and not lose the view, and I think that's such a freeing and beautiful thing. So that's really what I'm saying is the middle way, is being able to connect with the story, connect with the show, the movie, the podcast, the meaning, the feelings, but not at the cost of the lucidity. And at the same time, to connect with the spaciousness and the vastness, but not at the cost of the delicacy of the particular luminosities or appearances and their flavors and feelings. Because ultimately, that middle way is where compassion is, that you can feel the suffering of sentient beings and it doesn't bother you, right? The doctor that doesn't get sick, they have the medicine, they have the antibody, they don't have to not be around sorry, I can't go near you, I'll get sick, right? That's not ideal. You can be around people who have illness and you don't get it. And, that's the idea of the bodhisattva path. But yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a fine line, right? It's basically saying we can ride these emotions and feelings and cares and scenarios, but also be lucid, but also still feel. And I think this is why, again, lucid dreams can be such a wonderful arena for this kind of practice. If you find yourself lucid in a dream, the instructions that Guru Rinpoche gave through the Terma found by Karma Lingpas, perform miracles, do things you can't do in your ordinary life. And the idea is so that you experience the freedom of your nature, and it challenges some of the assumptions you have that even exist in dreams. It's crazy. And then as you work through them in dreams, it opens up your mind in the day. But also then after you do some of that, intentionally generate scary situations, jump off cliffs into fires, into rivers, bring up scary creatures, not so that you sit there and go, they still feel intense. It all is intense, but you're lucid and oh my gosh. And sometimes even I'll go out on a limb here and I'll say, there goes my mala. That's bliss. bliss is the inseparability of appearance and emptiness it is meaningful and fulfilling to ride the energy of lucidity and in the midst of existence, the unity of samsara and nirvana.
Can I go back to your example of the doctor who doesn't get sick? Because we all have our versions of that, whatever it is. In terms, you know, for all of us, in terms of whatever our gifts happen to be.
Right.
So, first of all, as human beings, we have limitations. And then sometimes, depending on the relative conditions, we might have, you know, we're more tired than usual, or we're more stressed than usual, or whatever, you know. I'm not sure quite what I'm wanting to say, but how do we not, I guess, be arrogant or at least ignorant of our own limitations in any one moment? I mean, even today, for example, for me, nothing to do with, but you know, I was watching so many podcasts and Zoom calls, and I wasn't taking enough time to digest each thing because each one was time limited. You get to see it free if you just watch it. This, you know, but I wasn't even taking the time to make some conscious choices because a lot of these things popped up, you know, but there's a limitation where we're not being lucid any longer.
Absolutely. I love it. And you know, I have a concern about Westerners emulating the exceptionalism put down or put forth in the Tibetan tradition around practice and accomplishment. Because even when we talk about diagnostics here, or enhancement practice, or testing when? You know, testing what state of mind, what was going on in our life. You know, there is no, it's not really an absolute test, it's a relative test. And, you know, can the human condition, like you said, it's challenging, and it is said that, you know, when we die, that the subtle body is freed of the body. It's 9 times sharper, and we're clairvoyant. We can move to any place instantly, and there's so much freedom in that subtle body, freed from the physical body. And yet the physical body is incredibly grounding, and it's a support. We're not darting all over wherever our mind thinks, and that's also helpful. I think the idea of a dun, the attacks of the duns that I mentioned earlier, that cultural idea of not driving our challenge, not reifying our frustrations or our challenges or our overwhelm as a sign of of a continued serious flaw in ourselves, right? Because as soon as we identify an inability to do any of number of these practices, or at any moment, our culture has trained us that, well, now is when you pounce on yourself and point out how you are not good enough, or et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I've long felt that one of the things that the natural perfection teachings teach us is that enlightenment doesn't come in the future, partly because there's no time, but more than anything is because primordially we already have this, what's called primordial enlightenment. We already are everything we need to be. The path is about revealing that and letting it shine. So any self-consciousness where we say, I don't have, is already missing the point, because you are it. And that saying that is an obscuration. But then we want to have the culture that says, oh, that's a dun. Me criticizing myself is yet another dun. Attacking. A dun attack is that eclipse of lucidity. Whenever lucidity is eclipsed, the duns can attack. When we illuminate the torch in the cave, the darkness is dispelled. The moment the torch is gone, the duns can attack. And so the idea is their attack is not a person with solid, truly existent qualities screwing up and therefore being culpable for that, but rather it's a momentary karmic autonomic process of getting subsumed that isn't even an identity losing an identity. It's just a process of being of obscuration taking hold of awareness. What gets even more tricky is the Buddhists, they like to talk a lot about definitive emergence, which I often translate as renunciation, but it also has another meaning which is that the irreversible quality of realization. And what I find interesting is that sometimes other spiritual teachers will say, oh, I've basically have attained realization, but sometimes I still get distracted or I get lost. Like I've heard some Hindu teachers will say things like that. In Buddhist culture, it's almost like that doesn't really get bandied about, even if it's the case. Culturally, that's sort of, and it's like, like how are we going to assess that? All I can say is that I think it's a misnomer because, firstly, when we talk about focus, we often think, what is the person mindful, for example? Like Suzuki Roshi was like famously forgetful, right? And in Japan, that was culturally not acceptable. So one time he forgot to go to a funeral and he was somewhere far away and he was somehow informed and he got on a train and came back and did it. And, people were just so frustrated with him and he's kind of culturally mortified. But my argument would be like, that has nothing to do with his realization of his nature. He was focused on something else. So it's like, where are you placing your mind? We could say, so in other words, I think it's almost, not only is it irrelevant, it's also impossible to evaluate because it's not how it is. There is no one way that one's focus. I just keep thinking of this multifaceted jewel, right? There's no one way that awareness can be attentive, and there's so many realms and focuses that no one's going to agree and have consensus about where a facet should be aimed unless you're in their facet. And of course we're not. So interesting, right? And if you regard yourself as already having everything you need, then when we as practitioners have challenges, the really excellent practitioner, I believe, just is so well trained that when we see, oh no, I was, I made a mistake, or I was focused on this and they wanted me to be focused on that, or I was doing this but I got involved in that, we just come back and we're just available and gentle. And then from the outside, people go, oh my God, that person's so realized. But isn't that the irony? Like, the less we react to our mistakes, the more people go, that's it. But the irony is everyone can do that, but it's just a matter of making peace where we're not comparing ourselves to some other moment, that we're really surrendered into what we already are. Right? And that's a fact. I'm trying to speak both non-linearly and linearly at the same time. I'm doing my best I can, but I love what you brought up because my take on it, and that's where I went. I don't know. Does that resonate with you, Lynn? Is that like where you were kind of going, or is it was a different direction?
I
Speaking
got
to
lost for a short while, and then I got what you were saying. Because because I wasn't going in there, I wasn't seeing, in a sense, what I was saying as, a self-criticism and limitation, in the sense of just accepting my humanity and accepting my luminosity as it is, that in this world, there's no way you can attend to all those things. And you're constantly readjusting to those things. Rather than, because I think you were speaking to the deeper thing, which is, and what are your expectations of yourself, in a sense, and what happens when you have those expectations towards yourself.
right, exactly. And what you're saying is so right on, because it's like just the nature of our bodies and the point that the fact that we're in this point, and then how we regard what unfolds is where I was. Yeah, but it's the same basic thing, right? I mean, when I think of a culture like ours that's been conditioned to be so hard on ourselves and take responsibility for karmic arisings that are autonomic. And, even when I think of the most misbehaving people, for me, in my heart, in my practice, I see that it comes from ignorance. It comes from confusion. It comes from a view that is out of touch with something elemental in that person's nature and their environment. And of course, that gets compounded and they can create tremendous, unthinkable harms. But it just like, as Stephen was pointing out earlier, even when the most difficult things are happening, they never betray the nature of empty luminosity. Or as Longchenpa said, nothing can escape the scope of space. Right? Like, it's another way of saying that poetically. Like, everything's happening within space. You can't get outside of. There is something more fundamental than the particular appearances that are happening.
Nick, can you talk about the unborn? Is that an easy subject?
It seems related to what we're talking about. I like it, Stephen. I think that's that was kind of what the verbal dance that I was trying to do, which is that on the one level, we think of time as real, and we have a relative experience that is valid. It is a facet of reality that we can experience, time. Nothing is denying that can appear and can be valid. On the other hand, when we look at it from the experience of our own practice, let alone all the cool quantum physics and all that stuff that can illustrate these things too, apparently, but in our own subjective experience, we know, I mean, many people have joked this year has been the longest, shortest year ever. I love that. I think it's true. It's like it's felt so long in some ways and so quick in other ways. And it's because all of our reference points have changed. And so collectively, we're all like, what the hell? Time is flexible and it's elastic in perception. It's not as we know, some days feel longer, some moments. That's natural to us subjectively. What's crazy about the unborn is that even the act of solidification or shempa or eclipsing as it's happening from a certain perspective, it feels like the lucidity is dimming. But what's crazy is there's actually, the lucidity can't dim. And it's what knows the claustrophobia. How do you know you feel claustrophobic? When we're lost in a dream or a storyline, what is it knowing all of that? It's never can be stopped. But it is possible for beings to live entire lifetimes and many, many lifetimes, and generally without knowing their nature. Practice is said to be such an incredible fortune because it gives us the tools to, being this self-aware universe happening to be in the body with that we're in, we can actually know our nature. And what we experience there is this miraculous, impossible to grasp reality of an awareness that has no center, no beginning, no end, no fringe. It just seems to be beyond time and relative space in that way. It has a spacious quality, a clarity, but it's said to be ineffable, even though we come up with all sorts of wonderful terms for it. And as we experience that primordial kind of awareness, it's unborn because everything that happens is always exactly right now, and it would always take another moment for the conceptual mind to try to step outside of that and describe it and believe that it was outside and there was time and that it could say something that would encompass. There's a lot of assumptions there, but in the ordinary consciousness we do that all the time. We think about our thoughts, we think about the last moment, but in this space of primordial pure awareness, there's an unending, unbeginningless, and endless shining, which is actually the nature of the universe and reality itself. And so it's said to be unborn because it never really begins or ends. It's never, and yet it appears. There's appearance, and appearance is the expression of this unbelievable, impossible truth.
Nick, does that mean, it doesn't mean like nihilism, like part of me is unborn, and then, you know, after I lose my body, I'm not going to feel any, I'm not going to be aware, or in other words, there'll still be an awareness and I'll be aware that I'm aware, even though there is no solid me type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, isn't that crazy? And that's the crazy thing about being, the emness of awareness that knows itself, is self-luminous. It is not, it is because it's not born into conditions, into a particular form, or even forms express the unborn. That kind of time notion that when we die, from the point of view of primordial awareness, that there's no such thing as dying to be done, as Kotsenpa's song says. That it appears there is, but we're never really born and we never really die. There's the display nature, which is non-nihilistic because there is appearance, but that appearance itself is empty of actually being really born. It's this undulation of luminous emptiness. If we just take for a moment the experience of timelessness and say, whoa, you mean every moment is just an expression? It's not time, it's just the unfolding of this endless reality of its own display nature, its empty luminous reality. And then it's like, whoa. And you can see you can't grasp it, but you can enjoy the beingness. And it's said, you know what's crazy is that Yeshe Sogyal and Padmasambhava are said to have realized the deathless Jalu, which is the rainbow body, their subtle body, fully alive and enlightened. And they were deathless before they died, meaning they realized complete deathlessness in their own awareness directly, and they knew for certain before their bodies were shed, they knew exactly that there isn't any dying at all. And direct, complete confidence. And it's like we can do that. It's pretty hard to do, but we can do any degree of that, and any amount that we can actually recognize. It's the same thing we're recognizing as our pure nature and sacred world. It's just continuing to steep in that, and as that grows and matures and expands, the ways that we believed it was other than that, we see through, and we see directly how it's a different way. Yeah. Nice. Well, we did it. I thought with just us, I was like, oh, maybe we'll just do an hour. We can't be stopped. Let's dedicate the Marin. Here, I think we'll do a song. Want to do Friends? Okay. Friends, empty forms, it's like a wild to think of them as being truly real, but only make your many sufferings increase. To know empty forms. Will make illusion like samadhi, increase compassion, free of clinging, will increase, and all deferential you will also increase, and meditation, it's fixation free and conduct free of duty, increasing all the many marvels. This by far the most marvelous of all the many wonders. It's the most wonderful. See you.
Thank you.